Alright, so today what we're doing is we're cutting down, this is a Dana 44 out of what would be a 1974 to 79 Jeep truck. These are roughly about 65 inches to wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface. We're going to cut this one down right around 5 inches to go into a CJ7. We're going to stay spring under, and this will get an International Scout 2 Dana 44 rear end. So the rear end is going to be about 58 inches wide, front end will be about 60 inches wide, which is about perfect for keeping the correct track width. On this one, we're only going to cut the long side down. You can either take a 4-inch cut-off wheel and cut this weld out. If you are going to narrow it, you don't have to worry about cutting into the tube. You can do it with a 4.5-inch grinder. I like doing it with a bandsaw so that you can keep everything level, straight, and true. Another thing when you're doing something like this, always be checking your caster angles and pinion angles. As you can see, without sitting flat on the forklift here, we have 0.1 degrees of negative caster. Luckily, the Jeep that this is going into has a shackle reversal, so it's going to have angle built into the springs. And as you can see, we've got roughly 10 degrees of pinion angle, which is more than plenty for, if you're running a 3 or 4-inch lift. So we're really not going to do anything to this side. We're going to cut the long side down. This will take a custom cut axle shaft, match the caster on both sides, and then we'll be installing a new shaft. The other thing that you can do on these is take any Dana 44 carrier, open carrier, take some old carrier bearings and take a die grinder on the inside of the bearing. Just go enough to where it'll slide on and off of the carrier nice and easily. You can set that in here. You can also take a tape measure and run that from the inside of the spider gear to the outside of the inner C to measure that way. If you do Dana 44s long enough, you kind of figure out what goes with what and what you can get to a correct wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface. So that's what we're going to do today. This is number 1. We've got 2 others to go. And biggest thing about these, take your time. Make sure everything's level so that you get a nice even cut. Makes a lot less work for you down the road. Alright, so we've got everything level. We've got our bandsaw level. We have the housing, the top of the tube. Make sure all that is the same, whether it's 0.00 or 0.1. Make sure everything is equal when you're making that cut. Half a degree, a degree makes a big difference when you're cutting through a 3-inch axle tube. Alright, so we've got everything set up. Now it's time to just let the saw do the work. Okay, so as we go down, we're just following the straight back side of that inner C. And we're going to cut straight down, and it's going to cut straight through that weld, and makes our job a lot easier. So you sometimes have to hold it because that weld is smooth, and sometimes the saw doesn't always like to get down into it. So another thing you can do is take any 3/8 half-inch extension. This kind of keeps some pressure on the blade. Keep it straight as you come down. And once it bites into the weld and starts cutting, then you don't have to follow it after that. Alright, so knuckle is now cut off, or inner C. There is a few different ways you can do that. I like the bandsaw. It's slower, but it does not really create any heat whatsoever. This one is a jet. I've had a Harbor Freight bandsaw, and the blade would come off all the time. This one is a little bit more expensive, but it works really, really well. Like I said, you can use a chop saw. Chop saw just creates a lot of heat. And it's just kind of hard when you're cutting right at the inner C to get it a nice clean cut. This is a nice clean cut, very easy to clean up. Now, a lot of people will ask, well, how do you get out of the inner C? A few different ways you can do this. One is a torch. If you're really, really good with a torch, you can just torch this in about 3 places and just take a hammer and a punch, chisel, whatever, try to get it out. I like to use a just any Sawzall reciprocating saw, pie cut it in a few different places. This is not going to come out very easily. You got to remember it was welded, and these are, I don't want to say a press fit, but they don't just fall out. The next thing you will do is figure out how far in you need to make your final cut, which is you can measure the inside of this, take your blade thickness, and then come in. We are going to do 4 3/4 inches to narrow this down. The next part too, you can measure your factory axles and what you're going to go to. Another thing you can do, all this information is available on the Dana Spicer websites. This one is Spicer front and rear axle kit, 1967 to 78. They have GM, Ford, Chrysler, AMC, and Jeep, all the Dana 44s, Dana 30s, Dana 60s, front and rear ends. You can also buy the books or manuals individually. Easiest thing to do, just flip to your section, model 44 front axles, AMC, Jeep. And the really cool thing is, right after your bill of materials, they will give you each and every axle shaft length. You can look it up. We are dealing with, I'll show you right here, be a 1978 J truck with disc brakes. It'll tell you the bill of materials number, which usually is stamped on the long side axle tube. You can go all the way over to your right hand, left hand inner axle shaft assembly. It'll give you your part number, which is a 660091-5 or a 660091-6. You go to this table, axle shaft dimensions, you'll go down, you'll find that axle shaft is 35 1/4. We are actually going to bring it down to 30 1/2. Do your math, 4 3/4. Cut it down, and you're good to go. Okay, now that we have the knuckle cut off, nice clean cut, we've made our measurements. We are coming in, again, our overall cut down is going to be 4 3/4 inches. Like I said, there's a couple different ways. I put my dummy carrier in there. You can measure it on the tube from the face of the center section out, or like I said, you can just put a tape measure right here, flat edge, and come out as far as you want to get the distance from the shoulder of the axle shaft to inside of here. Like I said, this is not the first one I've done. If you are doing it for the first time, I would just remove your factory axles, measure from that shoulder to the end of the splines. If you know how far you want to come down, just subtract that distance. Make sure you measure a few times, account for your blade thickness. Again, you have a little bit of leeway. You know, 1/8 of an inch here or there isn't a huge deal, but try and get it as precise as you can. So we're about to start this final cut, then we'll clean up the end of the tube, get the old tube out of the old knuckle, get that back on, and then we'll be welding it up. Here we go. Okay, so we've got the housing cut down like we wanted, cleaned the end off, cleaned out the inside of the knuckle. We've got it hammered back on. You can put these in an oven and try and heat this up, put the tube in dry ice. Sometimes you can get them to slide on, but no matter what, probably you're gonna have to tap it on with a hammer. We have made sure that our camber adjustment, you don't really have much. This kind of self-seats on the tube, but you can tweak this just a hair if you want to hit here and here. Like I say, just go off of your stock side, try and match that. Also, when you're doing this, if you're welding with 220, you usually don't have to heat this up. It does make it easier if you take either a oxyacetylene torch, a weed burner, I guess you can even use a MAP gas little torch and heat this outer knuckle up. Usually about 350 degrees or so. Makes it weld a lot easier. At that point, you could weld with a 110 instead of a 220. So I'm going to tack this in 4 places. I am going to weld it in quadrants. This is not necessarily a structural weld because of the inner C sliding over the tube, but you still want to make sure it burns in real nice and solid. And I'm going to get my tacks put on there, and then we'll weld it all completely, and then we'll be done with this guy, and on the next one.